minutes.
Mr. Dodaro, first of all, let me thank you and your staff for the outstanding work and cooperation on some critical issues that you've brought to this committee's attention on numerous occasions. That is dealing with improper payments and also the tax gap. And in that regard, I'd like to ask you, what's the last year that the IRS reported on tax gap?
I think it was based on 2008. Yeah, 2008 information, and that estimate was a net tax gap of a little over $400 billion. That's an annual.
That's $406 billion.
Right.
They don't report annually. That's on a periodic basis. Is there any rhyme or reason that determines when they report that?
No, initially years ago they didn't report an estimate. It was a GAO recommendation that required them that they finally implemented to come up with it. In all fairness, it requires a lot of effort and time, and they certainly haven't had excess resources lately to do it. But I think it could be done on a more regular basis. Right now, it's just dependent on them. I mean, Congress could set a reasonable interval for them to update that information, particularly given the changes that have been made in the tax law recently. I would hope after a period of time and there's some experience, they update it.
I would appreciate it if you had some recommendations on what that timetable ought to be, and if you would provide them to my office. In that regard, this is one of the points that I've been raising about the tax reform, that one of the main objectives was to reduce the complexity of the tax code in order to reduce the uncollected taxes, to reduce the tax gap. You've made numerous recommendations that I think we need to implement, the IRS needs to implement, and Congress needs to exercise oversight over it, because it's one of these things that I tell people I have moments here when I think my head will explode. And when we talk about $800 billion deficits, and half of that could have been erased by collecting all the taxes, plus the interest on that we're having to borrow, drives me nuts, along with my next topic, which you're well familiar with, and that's improper payments.
Yes.
And we're, again, very fortunate to have the expertise of the GAO available to try to work out a reasonable solution. I want to talk a little bit about some specifics on the improper payments. The premium tax credit improper payments, we don't really talk about that a lot. You have a number in your report of $35 billion. Is that savings, or is that the net cost?
That's a total cost.
Okay. Do you have any idea of what we might expect in savings?
No, not really yet. They really haven't done a lot of the proper assessments and have much experience in that area yet to come up with any estimates. I think it'd be good to press them to move forward in that area, and then the congressional encouragement would be helpful.
When we talk about encouragement, people generally interpret that to mean negative. I think we ought to take a more positive approach to this on the whole spectrum of improper payments. And you touched on this earlier with the IRS, with their outdated IT systems. That's a problem throughout the federal government. If you look at the improper payments, and this is the work that your staff has done, over 20% of the problem is antiquated data systems. And I think that lends itself to other errors on the administrative side, which is another 30-something%. So if we could deal with this in a more positive way, and one of the things that I'm thinking about doing is that the savings that we get by eliminating improper payments might go back into replacing antiquated IT systems, and I think it needs to be done federal government-wide so that you have the interfaces that are necessary. It's one of the problems with Social Security. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. The systems are a key part of this, particularly if you want to prevent things from happening up front. But there also has to be good data sharing to go along with that. You can have great systems, but if they're not allowed to share data, like, for example, one of our recommendations is that the Congress direct the Social Security Administration to give the full death master file to the Treasury Department. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that we have a do not pay list, and we have one department that has the most comprehensive list of deceased people that won't give it to the Treasury Department because they believe it can't be shared. Another example is in our Railroad Retirement Board. They're using earnings data that's 2 or 3 years old from IRS, and they need access to the new hire database. So I think a combination of proper incentives, and I'm glad to see the administration set a goal for reducing improper payments, and they have IT modernization on the President's management agenda, but there has to be sharing of information to go along with it to really, I think, have a comprehensive package.
Well, my goal for reducing improper payments is considerably higher than the administrations. I've had this conversation with OMB Director Mulvaney, who's a dear friend. But again, I commend you. I'm one of these odd birds that looks forward to the GAO reports. There's some people look forward to the next great novel. I look forward to the next great GAO report. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and it's my privilege now to recognize the gentlelady from Michigan.